2020 open. Doing so, it's a privilege to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and also that form the footprint of our spectacular region, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also extend congratulations to them on their continued nurturing of their culture. Acknowledge that for those listening in today, today is the first day that we are able to take up the opportunity of having our ordinary meeting in the former Boona Council chambers. Again, this is a situation necessitated by the distancing requirements to ensure safety and ongoing compliance under the COVID regimes. I note that we have full attendance of councillors and officers, with one apology being from the GM of People and Strategy today, and there is no proxy for that role. Councillors, we have also been advised that we do not have a member of our Ministers Fraternal able to join us today. So if you will bear with me, consider a few words from Proverbs 15 and starting at 21. Folly is a joy to those who lack sense, but a person of understanding walks straight ahead. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. Make an apt answer is a joy to a person, and a word in season, how good it is. Councillors, as we consider that before us today, we should ensure that we do indeed pay heed to the wise advisors that we have available to us, that we are cautious to steer clear of that portion of the folly of those who lack sense, and that we ensure that we apply good understanding to our deliberations. Let's just share a word of prayer. Father, it is a privilege to live in this spectacular place. It is a privilege for us as a council to serve as leaders in this community, to have an accountability that is beyond today and looks to the excitement and sustainability of tomorrow, that we can continue to nurture communities of character, that we continue to nurture a place that holds its head high with the dignity and purpose of our communities. As we consider our deliberations today, may we indeed apply clear understanding, thoughtful consideration to the accountabilities of our roles, respect for the consolidated wisdom of our advisors, and attention always to the calling and accountability of our roles. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, councillors. Turn now to item 5, and that is regarding a declaration of interest concerning matters with the meeting today. Do we have any such declarations?
Yes, Mayor, I have a conflict in 11.2, the Eka Show holiday, as is.
Thank you, Councillor McGuinness. That's for item 11.2. Any other declarations or perceived conflicts of interests? Thank you, councillors. So noted, councillor. We get to that matter. So the ongoing reminder to ensure the currency of registers of interests. Councillors, there are no announcements before the meeting today. There are no deputations scheduled or requested for today. Come to item 9, the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, you've had those available to you to consider. Now table before you with a recommendation for adoption of those minutes. Seek a mover. Councillor Swanborough moving, a seconder. Councillor West, thank you. Wishing to speak further, councillor? Anyone seeking leave to speak against the resolution? If not, we put the motion to adopt the minutes of the prior meeting. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. There's no business before the meeting today arising from the previous minutes. We come to item 11 now, the consideration of the business of today's meeting. We come firstly to item 11.1. CEO, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, councillors, executive officers and members of the public listening at home. The first item is the 11.1 is the Local Government Association of Queensland's 124th Annual Conference. The recommendation there is that councillors note the Local Government Association of Queensland 124th Annual Conference information, and also to confirm that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be nominated as Council's delegates at the conference and councillors be endorsed as observers. Just a little bit about the conference this year. Obviously, with COVID, every effort has been made by the Local Government Association to ensure that the event is a COVID-safe event. The theme of this year's conference is Next Gen Councils, reflecting the fact that there's a whole new generation of leaders in the community as part of their local government service as a councillor. We've had indications from all councillors and the Mayor of their availability to attend this year, noting that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor's conference attendance fees are included in our annual subscription to the Local Government Association. The fees are shown there for early bird conference registration of $1,540 per councillor. We've allowed for conference dinner and accommodation in the budget for this year, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions to the report for clarification? Any additional comments to the report?
Yes, Mayor, I'll just make a comment, say that it is very important that we put our good foot forward at these conferences. We've got some very strong items on the agenda to put to the LGAQ around funding for our community. So I'm really looking forward to going to see how the conference goes and to keep push them agenda items forward and try and get more for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Chalk. Any other comments? I would observe that the nature of the agenda is quite exciting because given the state of flux across local government over recent years, this conference is very timely with the focus on next gen, the recognition that what used to pass as suitable in the past and the approaches that were there in the past are no longer capable of meeting the needs of our communities today, and it is time for a next generation of thinking. And I look forward to indeed not just the dealing with the motions, but also some of the presentations that challenge our thinking to look to the future rather than back into history. Okay, I seek there's no further comments, then there's a recommendation before us from the CEO in two parts. CEO, I'll get you to read that recommendation for the benefit of the digital gallery, and then I'll seek a mover.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that Council note the Local Government Association of Queensland 124th Annual Conference information, and the Mayor and Deputy Mayor be nominated as Council's delegates at the conference, and councillors be endorsed as observers.
Seek a mover. Councillor Enright, seconder, Councillor McGuinness. Wishing to speak further, Councillor?
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with the previous comments. I think it's an opportunity for our council to learn from the opportunities that will be made available at this conference and provide an opportunity for us to give input into the future direction under the Next Gen agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 11.2. Councillor McGuinness, thank you for... Don't go too far. The next item before us, 11.2, CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item, each year, Council is asked to nominate a date for the show holiday. The Queensland Government Office of Industrial Relations writes, and this year they seek our submission no later than the 21st of August 2020. In recent times, Council resolved to continue to hold the date on the 10th of August, despite there being no ECA for this period. For next year, we're nominating the 9th of August as that date for the ECA, which is the Monday of the 2021 show. So the recommendation there, Mr. Mayor, is that Council nominate the Monday of the 2021 Royal Brisbane Show, 9th of August 2021, as a public holiday for the Scenic Rim region. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions to the report?
Yeah, Councillor McConnell, if I can just ask why we're doing the Monday and not the Friday as everyone else in the southeast, just for those out listening.
I'm happy to make a response, as we discussed again, for holding it that way this year. Thank you, Councillor. The question's quite useful for enlightenment. To keep our public holiday on a different day to our city cousins opens up economic opportunity for our region, for those who don't necessarily go to the show on People's Day and don't come into the long weekend, for those who perhaps have their day at the end of the week. By us having ours at the beginning of the week allows our region to operate on a slightly different cycle and to offer the benefits of access to our region to those who wish to come rather than make the choice of going to the exhibition. And certainly the experience over the last week and a half has been that people have relished the opportunity to experience the country firsthand. Thank you for the question. Any other questions, comments? So the motion's been read for you, councillors. I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell, seconder. Councillor West, wishing to speak further, councillor? Anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion as per the recommendation. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Would someone please retrieve Councillor McGuinness? Page 11 of the agenda, councillors. Item 11.3.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors, and everyone listening online, executive. This is a great opportunity for the Scenic Rim to establish the Scenic Rim Town Crier position, or to refill that position that's been held for many, many years by Mr. John Deeks. Mr. Deeks was originally in 1995 appointed the Boona Town Crier, and after amalgamation in 2008 was appointed the Town Crier for the Scenic Rim region. Mr. Deeks has retired after 20 years of nearly 20 years in that role, and in the report we acknowledge that service to the region. The purpose today is to seek Council's endorsement of issuing an expression of interest for the Town Crier honorary position, in order for us to seek interest from across the region and formalise that appointment, thereby enabling the appointee to become a member of the ancient and honourable Guild of Australian Town Criers, which require an endorsement from Council for that appointment to be accepted. The report is reasonably self-explanatory, and I'll leave it to councillors if you have any questions.
Councillors, any questions for clarity to this report? Any comments you wish to make or observations in relation to the report? Councillor Chalk?
Yes, I was contacted by a member of the public regarding this position. He showed great passion for it and was very keen to not only represent the local town of Boona, but the whole of Scenic Rim. And I think that's a good distinction to make, that this role is about a whole region, not just localised regions. And Mr. John Deeks did a great job in our local town. He's very well known, done a very honourable job, and I'd like to acknowledge that. And I'd also like to endorse this, as I think it's a very good idea for our community to keep this tradition going.
Thank you, Councillor Chalk. Just for those distracted by the noise over my shoulder, I think there's a very excited crow has been attacking this window all morning. I note your offer of assistance, Councillor McGuinness. Getting back on track. Thank you for those words, Councillor Chalk. I just wonder, in light of those comments, whether the GM would consider, in addition to the recommendation, that actually there is we also formally recognise and thank Mr. Deeks for his excellent service over the years.
Most definitely, Mayor. I'd be happy for that addition to be made to the recommendation.
Can we put that in as point 1 of the recommendation?
Yes.
Please, thank you. Councillors, the GM is amenable to that amendment to the recommendation before we move to motion, if you're supportive of that.
Mayor,
Councillor McInnes.
Mayor, I just wonder whether, in view that we're meeting here in the Burnett Chambers, whether we shouldn't invite him along to lunch or morning tea sometime when we're having a council meeting in the next number of weeks.
I think that's an excellent idea, Councillor, health permitting, and we won't put that in the motion perhaps, but we certainly should look at that opportunity for recognition, given the constraints on meetings, etc. Councillor Chalk, are you comfortable with that form of words? GM, you comfortable with that amendment?
Yes, Mayor, I am. Thank you for adding that.
Thank you. Then, if there's no further discussion, I'll get the GM to read the recommendation in full now before we move forward to a motion.
Thank you, Mayor. That Council acknowledge and thank Mr. John Deeks for his years of service as Town Crier. That Council consider the role of Scenic Rim Town Crier as an honorary position for the region and confirm its willingness to continue with this tradition. And that Council endorse advertising through an expression of interest for the honorary position of Scenic Rim Town Crier for the region to gauge the level of interest in the community and to ensure an open and transparent process in appointing a new Town Crier.
Thank you. I seek a mover for the motion. Councillor Chalk, seconder. Councillor McConnell, wishing to speak further, Councillor? No. Anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That's also carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 11.4, page 14 of your agendas, councillors.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. For this item, reconfiguring a lot in Mary Street, Harrisville, I actually have the Manager of Planning attending today who's like to provide some commentary on this report.
Thank you, Deborah. So the application before council is for a development permit for reconfiguration of a lot. It's lot 200 situated in Mary Street, Harrisville, to reconfigure the property by subdivision into 24 rural residential lots, new roads and a drainage reserve. This lot is within the urban footprint and within the township character housing zone in the Ipswich planning scheme. The subdivision achieves a lot mix of lots from 3,000 metres up to about 4,600 square metres, with most having an area of 4,000 square metres. Lots 23 and 24 will achieve access to Mary Street. They'll fall short of this figure, and their frontage is less than 40 metres. However, it is acknowledged that this is due to the available area constrained by Mary Street and existing properties outside of this application. These lots, however, are in keeping with the rural residential nature of the locality and are much larger than a typical block on the southern side of Mary Street. The estate will be accessed off Mary Street, which was upgraded at the first stage of this subdivision development some time ago. A cul-de-sac is proposed at the west, intended to provide emergency access into Carsons Avenue. This emergency access is not supported, as it could potentially be used by residents as a shortcut to a gravel road and would have no constructed access and could be dangerous. The proposal also incorporates a 3-point turn to the east between lots 17 and 18, anticipating a future road connectivity to future development on the land on the east. Given that it is unknown when that development on the adjoining land might take place, the 3-point turn is not supported, and the development would need to incorporate a turnaround area instead. Both of these matters have been incorporated into the conditions of approval. The proposal has been assessed against the planning scheme, the regional plan, and council's various engineering requirements. And based on the assessment, it is considered that council could approve the application subject to reasonable relevant conditions as outlined in the report, and in particular noting those changes to the road conditions.
Thank you. Councillors, questions to the report? Any observations to the report? Councillor McGuinness?
Excuse me. Yes, Mayor, I can appreciate that this has been done in a number of stages and approval was done. I am quite concerned of the access out of Mary Street, as people will note from the diagram there. The bottom part of Mary Street is a laneway, I suppose, a 10-metre wide. I think it is in the last some 60 metres. There's going to be a lot of traffic, extra traffic coming out through there. I can appreciate the position we're in, and I note in the report where the manager says that it basically wouldn't be able to approve it coming onto Carsons Avenue, but it does concern me that all this extra traffic and some 16 houses, I think it is, up Mary Street further, plus a church, it will have quite an impact, and it's not a very good corner at all, but we've got what we've got, and I just wanted to express my disappointment that it initially was approved in this way, and we're probably stuck with this the way it is, but it is going to impact on a number of residents at the bottom end of Mary Street.
So, would you care to comment or respond to that?
Yeah, I acknowledge Councillor McGuinness's concerns, and we had similar concerns. Probably something to consider, though, that we do have development application on land to the west of Carsons Avenue, and there'll be a future, potentially future development to the east. We do need to probably look at the road network in Harrisville that services this area, and Carsons Avenue being upgraded would be a good option. It is something we're looking at. The way we've asked the estate to be reconfigured, essentially there'll be council land between the new road and Carsons Avenue. So if at a later stage we're able to organise an access out onto that dirt road, we would have be able to reconfigure our own lot of land to give us that access.
Could I just ask some questions to clarify Councillor McGuinness's comments, particularly for those who aren't here and seeing the screen? Am I correct, Councillor, to interpret from your comment the particular concern is the section on the western end of Mary Street that is narrower, that is not related to this particular development, is somewhat of a legacy issue of a prior development? Is that where your comments were targeted, to that pinch point? Language? It
was, and my understanding is that further up in Mary Street, the majority of Mary Street, it has been widened, and part of this development is that the street could be widened, but given the houses down on the western end of Mary Street, it wouldn't be. It would impact those people quite adversely if it was to Mary Street was to widen.
To say certainly a legacy issue, as you indicate. Thank you. Any other comments or questions to the report? Councillor Enright?
Mayor, could I just, for the benefit of my lack of understanding of that particular area of Harrisville, ask perhaps Councillor McGuinness for his understanding of the flow of traffic in and around Harrisville and where the majority of traffic would likely to flow from this proposed development.
Please, Councillor McGuinness.
Yes, thank the councillor for his inquiry. It would, all this traffic basically would come along Eagle Street out to the main Queen Street in Harrisville. Very little wanting to go out Carson's Avenue to Dunn's Avenue at all. It's a dead end area, that street there, so it's apart from one business that's carried on up there, it's small business. It's everything, 99% of the vehicles would be heading south along Eagle Street.
And that's, which is Eagle Street?
She's marking it.
Okay.
If I could be so flippant, it goes along the Harrisville sale yards. It used to be there.
Right.
Indeed. And certainly...
It's marked on one of the maps. Sorry for interrupting, Mayor. Eagle Street is on the...
Page yes, in the report. Yes.
So scroll up.
Oh, sorry, scroll to the next page, I think was the... Sorry, next page in the report. Yep.
Down, I think it is.
No, there, that one.
No, so
there. Your other left. So you can see Eagle Street just at the bottom left-hand corner of that.
Yeah.
And that corner of Eagle and Mary has been the subject of conversations for improved visibility, I believe, for some time. If I asked the GM of Asset Environment Sustainability.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. And certainly difficult to resolve given that legacy at this point in
Mayor,
time.
just a question perhaps of the GM of Asset and Sustainable, Environmental Sustainability. Is there likely to be some work done on those streets in the near future?
At this point in time, it doesn't appear on our 10-year capital works program, but certainly if the need arose, we'd certainly analyse and compare it against other priorities and see that if this one actually, or this intersection actually got to the point where it needed to be included, we certainly would do that. But at this point in time, it's not on the 10-year program.
So that would be monitored by traffic flow and other development in the area?
Potentially, yes.
Any other points of clarification, councillors? Yeah. Sorry. Yep. Microphone, please, Councillor. Councillor Swanborough.
Yeah, just a question to the General Manager of Asset Sustainability. The $351,864, which is going to be applicable to headworks charges, how will this be applied to the development?
I think Mark can answer some of that question, but certainly I can say that the headworks charges aren't all related to assets that are under council's control. Some would be for urban utilities. The remainder would certainly be certainly looked at as part of our funding stream within our infrastructure assets. We certainly have a backlog of work that we run through on our 10-year capital works program, and within our infrastructure planning, we actually have those that are associated with developments. At this point in time, I can't answer exactly the project that would be funded, but certainly would be assisting in those backlog projects that are required.
Yeah, probably just to clarify how infrastructure charges, the revenue is applied. It is applied to trunk infrastructure, so it's large-scale infrastructure to provide improvements that benefit the wider community. So probably a bit unlike developments in the past where they would give a contribution to upgrade roads, literally outside the development. In this case, they're required to upgrade the roads as they did previously to Mary Street and make the infrastructure contributions, which would service the region on a wider basis and not specifically for this individual development.
Thank you for that clarification. And that's just a further point to that. That's a construct directed from the state, not a determination of council. Would that be correct?
That's correct. That's the way infrastructure charges have been occurring since about 2011. It's a much broader system than was traditionally in place before that.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Councillor Chalk?
Yeah, I've got a question about this new development and how the foot traffic will connect to the main street. Is there along Eagle Street? I assume that most of the foot traffic would be. Is there any footpaths along there or safe access to the main street?
Not planned as part of this development, no.
And I think, Councillor, it's fair to say you touch on one of those long-term challenges across the region, that there's a very large backlog of footpath connections needed in many areas of the region, and we're trying to chew that very big burden a bit at a time.
Can I ask a question, Mayor, to the same to General Manager, Planning Manager? Why isn't that conditioned as a part of this development to do footpaths, which ultimately the ratepayers are going to have to fund later on, I think is what Councillor Chalk was getting at.
We have to consider what is reasonable and relevant. To provide footpaths from this development right through to the centre of the town would be unreasonable. Within the estates themselves, we look at the footpaths, but the interconnections would be, in this case, be unreasonable, just given the length that it would require.
Sorry, Councillor McInnes.
Could I just comment on that? If my memory serves me correctly, the footpath from McGregor Street out to Queen Street, there is a footpath there, but I think I'm right in saying that from McGregor Street to Mary Street doesn't have a footpath, so it wouldn't be a big area to add to it. It's not the whole area to the centre of town. So I think Councillor Chalk's suggestion isn't a bad idea if that is possible. Where we move forward with this is the other question, of course. I'm not 100% sure, and I know I should know whether that is or not, but I don't think there is a footpath from Mary to McGregor.
So councillors, I think we're into an issue here about the requirement. I'm going to ask the planning manager to comment again about what constitutes fair and reasonable, but also could you please clarify for us, again, this was under the Ipswich planning scheme, not under a new planning scheme, but even so, in a rural residential estate, is it our standard requirement to require footpaths to be provided, and given the nature of those estates? And secondly, is it a requirement to this issue of connection back to the centre of town? I'm conscious that we've been overruled previously on one such requirement. Would you be able to comment in that context?
You're right, Mayor. In relation to footpaths, they are generally in residential areas, not so much in rural residential areas. simply because of the size of the lots and the cost of footpaths. As we know, they're more expensive than one imagines. And these lots have minimum frontage of at least 40 metres, so there's a lot of footpath per lot. It would be unreasonable to require the applicant to put in the footpath all that distance. We would need to check if there was some capacity to give credits under infrastructure charges, but that relates more to what's in the 10-year plan, and as we just heard, it's not in the 10-year plan at this stage. So if we were to investigate that further, we would have to go away and do quite a bit of work on that.
Just a further question.
Sorry, before you do, can we just clarify? If we were, because the notion, as per the chart in front of us, the notion that we're just talking about a footpath from the junction of Eagle and McGregor with the junction of Eagle and Merry is a little bit misleading. If the notion was about having footpath access, it would need to connect to that estate rather than being somewhere totally disconnected from that estate. So for those not able to access that chart, the section of footpath that was discussed between McGregor and Merry is still at least 100 to 200 metres from the access point to the estate. Would that be correct?
From looking at the map, yes, that'd be about my take.
So, councillors, I guess if you are contemplating a proposal around footpaths, it'd be nice to understand what it is you're contemplating so that the officer can give an accurate response. Now, Councillor Swanborough.
Yes, Mayor, I was alluding to that clarification. If we know the footpath is 100 to 200 metres, does the manager of planning still believe that's unreasonable?
Sorry, Councillor, I think it's more than that that's the concern. It's the distance from McGregor to Merry, then the distance along Merry to the access point, and then up Merry to the, no, not there, there, that's the entrance point to the estate. So it's up there and then along that entrance way. So it's quite a bit more than 200 metres in total that you're proposing, you're putting up for discussion. So, and I think the clarification that perhaps the planning manager again might need to explain what's fair, reasonable and relevant, I think were the terms. Could you explain how that's determined?
So in this case, putting that footpath in right to town would also benefit a lot of other houses there and the rest of the people in Mary Street. So it's not provided solely for the purpose of the estate that's under consideration. So having said that, at times council does contribute via a credit on their infrastructure charges. So the case, say at the moment with Boys Town, they're building the footpath into town, but council gave credit for that on their well, it was contributions when that was approved, a different system, but council gave a credit for a component of that. So the developer contributed some money, the council contributed the rest because the benefit from that infrastructure was wider than just the development itself. So in this case, I think it'd be very difficult to give clear answers without knowing the exact figures, without knowing the footpath length, costs and the like, and what will be available as a credit under infrastructure charges to make that decision at this moment.
So,
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that this matter lie on the table for the duration of today until we can get the manager of planning to have a look at it for us and come back with an answer on that, or we can alternatively just defer this matter to the next meeting of council.
Before we take that step, councillor, whilst happy for consider it, are there any implications if this matter is deferred in terms of the developer and approvals?
We just have to check our decision period. We will be at the discretion of the applicant because we've been outside our timeframes for code assessment. So I'd have to double check that as to whether we would need to make a decision today or whether we could defer it. My preference would be to defer rather than rush this information back to council, but I would need to check with the applicant on that.
Okay. So on that basis, councillors comfortable to allow this to for now lie on the table for consideration later in the meeting to understand that decision period, to allow the planning manager to go away and review that file and bring this back for consideration later in the meeting, either then for formally advice to defer or to proceed if that's necessitated today. So, moved by Councillor Swanborough, seconded by Councillor Chalk. I don't think there's need for further discussion. Those in favour of that? Thank you. So I think that's the last planning matter. We will return to that later in today's agenda item. We move on to item 11.5.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, executive, and those listening in at home. Item 11.5 deals with petition that was received by council on 9th of March with regard to drainage at Aranga Drive. To support this particular report, there are a few things I'd like to highlight as an introduction. So the actual area in consideration is actually contained within a catchment about midway along before the actual drain enters a natural stream. There is a number of natural overland flow paths contained within the Aranga Drive area. Only a handful actually have easements in place. Those easements were either established as part of the development or later by individuals who were wanting to develop their block further, mainly install or place a residence, a house or a shed on the block. It's worth noting that changes in the last 5 years to the Queensland Urban Drainage Manual actually indicate that it's appropriate to actually have overland flow paths within developments. Developments also nowadays tend to use roadways as a point for higher flows, and you actually and I try to not be technical in these discussions, but I find it very difficult being an engineer not to use the words like 1 in 100 return interval or 1% return interval flow. But generally speaking, when it really rains and you get a lot of water, your drainage structures don't actually cope with the amount of water that comes from the sky. And in those instances, the Queensland Urban Drainage Manual actually requests that you analyse where that water will flow. And in this particular case, any drainage structure that would be put in the vicinity of Aranga Drive would actually take those lower flows or flows that are of that up to 10-year return interval type storm event. But anything above that, you would still need to maintain some level of overland flow path. As I previously stated, new developments you tend to have that flow down where your roads, but given the age of this development, the roads aren't necessarily placed in an appropriate location for that to be achieved in this case. So also highlight within the report that there is plans to certainly review the drainage within not only the petition area, but more widely the actual area that was the development back 30, 40 years ago. And there is actually a design program to be undertaken in the next 18 months to 2 years to understand what could be a solution in this case. But having said what I've already said, there would still need to be easements and low flow, channels to allow for your higher flows and higher flow events. I it's worth noting that the solution as a current, well, we don't know what the solution will be, but the higher level numbers certainly look that we consider of the order of $1.2 million, it being a solution in this particular case, or of that order. Now, it's also worth noting that that project would be funded from the long-term financial plan contributions towards drainage, and that funding is funded by all ratepayers, not just those within this area here. It's worth, part of this is also around the obligations a neighbour has to the upstream and downstream neighbours when it comes to accepting and the modification of any water flow through their block. There is some legal positions from private cases as law, and we as council need to be certainly aware of where our responsibilities lie with regard to any water that flows from one property to another. Although it would be that in a lot of cases people believe council is the governing authority. In some instances we're not, and in some particular aspects of this particular drainage area we're not the responsible authority with regard to that, and some of the issues pertain more so to a civil case. And we would suggest that people get their own advice on that, as council believes that then we're not the appropriate party to negotiate in that particular circumstances. Also worth noting is that officers have spoken to a number, not all, but a number of people that had signed the petition and have actually engaged with those on site, and with many and varied responses. Most of those responses will be taken into account when we look at the scale of the overall construction or proposed project, which, like I said, is in a number of years' time on the program. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Swanborough?
Yes, just one question in relation to some words in the report. I note your explanation of how it's going to be funded, but there is some confusion in the report to me when I read it in relation to, you make mention of the fact that the council has the power to levy special rates or charges on land in its area which benefits from the provision of infrastructure facilities. Was this comment put in there for a particular reason?
Yes, the reason that was put in there is council officers may come up with a solution that reduces the nuisance value of the water that flows through the blocks, but may not necessarily be to the liking of all that are involved in the catchment area. And it certainly offers them the opportunity to contribute or potentially contribute further funds to further enhance any level of service that otherwise may not be realised. It's worth noting that we might come up with a solution or potential solution that meets what we would consider appropriate guidelines and standards. It certainly allows all those involved the opportunity to contribute for something better than that.
Thank you. Other questions, councillors? Just before we come back to you, Councillor Swanborough, are there any other questions? Councillor?
Can I get some more clarification around council's responsibility in this matter? Where it begins, where it ends?
Look, to be honest, until we actually do a full scoping of the whole project, I can't in detail answer that question. Certainly, the reality of it is there is some water flowing in some locations that may be council's responsibility to actually ascertain how it's getting there and doing something about how to manage that. But the reality of it is, without doing a full study of the area, I'm not able to answer that fully. So in some particular cases, within the whole project, there may be a roadway that directs water in a particular way, or a driveway that needs to be adjusted that may cause a nuisance or flooding of a dwelling or a structure that we would certainly be responsible for. The issue is at some stages that by managing the flow of water that may be a nuisance or causing a disruption to one, we then by stealth, or want of a better word, fix the problem or a nuisance for someone else. So the reality is we may house A upstream of house B. House B has a nuisance, house A has an issue. By taking the water away from house A, you may in fact fix the nuisance for house B. So the reality of it is that until we actually do a full design of the area, I couldn't really answer that question in full. But there are some locations here where we believe it is more than a nuisance flow, and the reality of that is it's probably away from the petition area, to be honest. But within the petition area, there will be some benefits in dealing with other issues further upstream.
Councillor Swanborough.
I was just going to also answer Councillor Chook's question to the best of my ability. From my experience, council certainly does have legislative power to deal with drainage. I mean, that's in the report, and that's clear. But what council has responsibility really is for the maintenance of council-owned stormwater drainage. But council doesn't have responsibility for private stormwater infrastructure, I think is the general view. And there's also another probably a precedent by common law that residents must not divert natural runoff of stormwater in a manner that will cause a nuisance to neighbouring properties. And as we've been briefed on this particular instance, there's a blockage at the end of the easement, and water is not able to get past the end of the council easement into the block below. Subsequent to us talking about this previously, I went out and talked to the residents out there and had a look at the question myself, and I don't think whilst there's a physical obstruction there, I don't think there's any legal obstruction there, because these people have only merely built fences on their borderlines, and that stops the flow of water going through there. So I probably would have to disagree with the General Manager's view that, you know, this is not our responsibility. I think it is our responsibility, and I think it's probably solvable. I don't think it's a $1.2 million solution. I think it can be done much more cheaply than that. We have had conversations. They're not recorded in this report, but I welcome the recommendation, because I think that when the studies are done, as the General Manager has said.
We're getting into speaking to a motion. When you're getting into that, we're talking about clarification. You can speak for the once it's a motion, please.
Yeah, you're right.
Please curtail your comments. Thank you.
I'll stop.
So note the perspectives shared by the councillor. I think for clarification, the petition alleged there was illegality inferred on council's part about the current arrangements. My understanding from the report and further the background analysis, the design of the estate with showing natural flow paths and drainage easements was legal and legitimate, and the use of overland flow paths is still legal and legitimate as part of the drainage requirements for any new estate. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, that is correct.
And the suggestion in the petition that there is therefore that this is was an illegal arrangement, that would be a long stretch interpretation not supported by the evidence of what was in the subdivision plan. Would that be a correct understanding?
Yes, that would be correct.
Thank you. And is it correct that when this matter's been investigated a number of times, that there, regardless of the purpose or intent, that property owners in the area have either in history or in current day, via various actions, including plantings or particular construction of fence barriers, interfered with the performance capability of those overland flow paths.
That's correct.
Thank you for those understandings. So and my understanding from the report...
Mr Mayor, look...
So I'm just trying to clarify. I'm asking some questions.
Mr Mayor, I know you're trying to clarify, but for the very reason you stopped me talking, you are committing the same offence. So and no, I call a point of order on that.
Sorry, Councillor, you can call a point of order. I'm happy for the meeting to consider a point of order. I'm not talking about the recommendation. I'm trying to clarify the content of the report only. I'm not speaking about whether or not I report. So, councillors, if you wish to support a point of order on that, I'm simply trying to clarify. And if you allow me to continue, I'll explain.
Mr Mayor, I get to talk first on a point of order. Thank you.
Far away.
Mr Mayor, the standing orders, contrary to what you've said, are very clear about questions. And if you look up the standing orders, they talk about the fact that, yes, questions are allowable to an officer for clarification, and the standing orders also say that councillors can ask other councillors questions. But what is quite explicit in those standing orders is that once the officer of council has provided the comment, there is to be no further debate and no further comment in relation to it. And I believe that that line had been crossed in the conversation, and I believe that it should be noted for future purposes that in these sort of questions, there's no response after a question has been answered by anybody under the standing orders.
Sorry, Councillor, your interpretation of the standing orders around questions, I am not debating. I'm asking further for clarification. I'm simply seeking clarification of the contents of the report. This is a complex matter, and I'm referring to Division 6, Section 37. So, Councillor, for clarity, councillors, if you believe strongly that I should stop seeking questions for clarification, I'll listen to the floor of the meeting.
Mr Mayor, could I...
You've spoken to your...
You quote the wrong number. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about section 28.2 in the standing orders, questions, and I'll read it. A councillor or a question must be asked categorically and without argument, and discussion is not permitted at the meeting in relation to the reply or the refusal to reply to the question.
I'm not sure which version of the standing orders you're working on, Councillor. So the version I've got, Section 37 questions. At a meeting, a councillor may ask a question for reply by another councillor or an officer of the local government regarding any matter under consideration at the meeting. The question must be asked categorically and without argument, and discussion is not permitted at the meeting in relation to the reply or the refusal to reply to a question. Councillor officer who has asked a question may request that the question be taken on notice for the next meeting. Councillor who asks a question in a meeting, whether or not upon notice, is deemed not to have spoken to the debate of the motion to which the question relates. Okay, I can go on through those points.
Yeah, but so, you've said what I've said. That is the correct section, but it's discussion. It says it doesn't say comment. You can't comment. You can't make comments as you've been suggesting as the chairman.
Sorry,
because
Councillor,
discussion's not permitted.
Councillor, I'm not trying to open that. I'm simply trying to get clarity whether my understanding is correct. That's all I'm doing. I appreciate your interpretation, but the same as I allow latitude for you to step beyond some comment, this is about having an open understanding. I have one final question for the GM. The budget that's mentioned here about drainage, is that specific to the issue or is that more general to the precinct?
it's more general to the precinct. There are other properties within what was the developed area that have water issues, whether they're ones that need to be particularly solved by council. That would be a matter of a more detailed scope design.
Thank you for that.
I have another question, Mayor.
Yes,
Of
Councillor
the
Swanborough.
In relation to the comment in the report about the legality of the blockage of that easement, where you say it's responsibility, it's a civil matter. Have we had a legal opinion stating that that's a civil matter in this circumstance?
Not in this particular circumstance, but we have had opinions on similar, and we've extrapolated it to this particular case because we did not believe it was needed at this time.
Councillors, any other questions or comment? Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a question to the GM regarding the point 2 of the recommendation and specifically the words including revenue to undertake the work. I'm just wondering what forms of revenue that might include.
That could include, as mentioned previously, residents actually contributing to get a higher level of service outcome.
And is that as far as that revenue option would extend?
At this point in time, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Observations, councillors, before we deal to the motion or the recommendation before us? Okay, GM, I'll get you to read your recommendation in its 3 parts.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that council confirm the inclusion of the drainage project for Oranga Drive and surrounds Tambourine Mountain within the 10-year capital works program, and that 2, council give further consideration to the total budget including revenue to undertake the project, and 3, council thank and respond to the petitioner detailing council's action in this regard, which will include the investigation of options, the completion of designs, as well as proposed timing.
Moved by Councillor Swanborough, seconder, Councillor McConnell. Councillor, wishing to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I think this is a reasonable result, though they probably won't like the timing of it, but my hope would be that if cheaper and more effective solutions are put forward in the interim, that if it's more doable, that this work would be brought forward to assist the residents. But having said that, it remains on the Capital Works program, and petitioners will be advised accordingly. And I welcome the fact that a special rate on the whole project is not being proposed, as I first read in the agenda. The General Manager has clarified that reasonably, and so I support this recommendation.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Not. We'll put the motion, councillors. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to the item 11.6, page 36 of your report.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 11.6 deals with the revocation of the declaration of state controlled roads, in particular Mount Lindsay Highway, which is the section of, in particular, the revocation is the section of Brisbane Street between the satellites in the main intersection in the centre of Bow Desert through to where it joins with the northern part of the section of the Bow Desert bypass, which is now considered to be the Mount Lindsay Highway. So what this means is we now gain a further section of road on our road network. Happy to take any questions.
Councillors, you have the report. Any points, questions for clarification to the report? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just clarification to the GM regarding, as well as the road, what other pieces of infrastructure is handed over in this process? So any other freestanding items that would be included?
In general, the assets that get handed over to us is generally the pavement between the white line just outside of the parking area to the white line on the other side of the street, and any signs associated with the direction of traffic that may fall outside of that. Within town areas, council is generally responsible for the parking areas, and there is some shared responsibility with regard to drainage structures. Depends on where those drainage structures are and what their purposes are, whether they are actually connected with a transfer from Department of Transport main roads to ourselves. In this particular case, there may be a couple of gully pits and a small volume of pipes, but generally speaking, the most expensive or the most substantial portion of asset being transferred would be the pavement from the edge of the white line, which to from one side of the road to the other, which is approximately 8 metres in width. In some cases, it may be up to 12 if there are turning lanes and such. There'd be also the traffic islands, but within those traffic islands, council has, in some instances, maintained vegetation. So the reality of it is, the bulk of it is the pavement and the ceiling.
Does that address your question, Councillor?
Mostly, and perhaps just some street lights that are mid or centre median mounted. Would that be already council's responsibility, or might that be included as well?
So the payment of the lighting bill would then become council's responsibility. However, depending on what tariff the lights themselves are on, would very much depend whether they become council's or not. Generally speaking, and in this particular case, I'm not 100% sure, but I would believe that it would be on a tariff that would be just a maintenance and operations only, and they would remain the property of the electrical provider.
Thank you.
Other questions, Councillor McConnell?
Yeah, just a quick one on the rededication, I suppose, of that Mount Lindsay. So the Mount Lindsay will now go down the bypass, turn left, and then hook back right. So will the area in front of Mount St Mary's now be state controlled, or is that already state controlled?
It's already state controlled.
Okay, so it's already state controlled.
Yes.
So with the trucks now being prohibited through the town centre and going down past the school, how will the intersection out the front of Scenic Ford now handle that heavy traffic? And will there be ongoing issues with trucks trying to turn right back onto the Mount Lindsay?
At this point in time, it hasn't actually come up as an issue. However, it is certainly something main roads or Department of Transport main roads will certainly look at and consider if queuing became an issue to the right turn. But at this point in time, I haven't actually heard of any particular issues with regard to the layout of that intersection at this point in time.
Okay.
Except for when this road works.
Yeah, yeah, except at the current time right now. So in the report on page 36, part 3, or statement 3, commence a process to prohibit the use of heavy vehicles through Brisbane Street. How are we going to prohibit vehicles other than signage?
So as it currently stands, the road itself has been approved for double access as well as high mass limit vehicles. So those, we would certainly just be able to revocate those approvals. There's also some over-dimensioned, over-mass approvals. Because the road manager was Department of Transport and Main Roads, they had previously approved that area as a route for those vehicles. And now that with the change of road manager, those approvals would need to be reconfirmed. So when those approvals come through, or as they come through, we certainly are in a position to then not extend, as well as some blanket approvals that would otherwise have been approved in that location. So it is understood there are other opportunities you can put forward, such as signage to prohibit certain sizes and styles of vehicles that may not necessarily be doing business within that area. But at this point in time, we're not looking at going to that extent. However, if it becomes, or it would seem to be an issue further down the track, other than what I've just mentioned with the cancellation of some oversized overmass related permits, we're not planning on putting any additional signage at this point in time.
So more of a trust issue with the truck drivers to follow the bypass and go that way instead of down through the centre of town?
Potentially, yes. And you may or may not notice that as part of the revocation, there were a number of signs that were adjusted as far as the directions that vehicles travel. I look, realistically, we'll take the first steps first, and if it is actually an issue, we'll certainly follow that up further.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other matters? Okay, we'll ask you to read the recommendation for us, GM.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that council note the relocation and rededication of approximately 1.08 kilometres of state-controlled road being Mount Lindsay Highway, Brisbane Street, Badesett, from the intersection with Helen Street, Badesett, to the intersection with Telemont Street, Williams and Brisbane Streets.
Just to clarify, that's redeclaration, not rededication.
It's redeclaration.
Okay, sorry. Seeker mover.
Happy to move,
Councillor
Mayor.
Enright, seconded. Councillor McGuinness, wishing to speak further, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I acknowledge the work done by the GM's team in moving this section of road into council's ownership. I do acknowledge that this is an addition to our assets and will require a contribution toward its upgrade and maintenance. However, I do believe that the opportunity to allow this section of road to become part of council's assets and under our control provides so many opportunities for our town, in particular for the opportunities of the Badesett Town Centre Revitalisation Program, that having ownership and control of this road will enable this section to become an integral part of that project, and it's wonderful to see it come back under our control. Thank you.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Not. We put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 11.7.
Thank you, Mayor. 11.7 deals with the sale yard at Helen Street and the extension of the lease over the sale yards. This is in particular Peggy Calf sale yards, which is located on lot 32 of SP 113955, which is known as part of Davison Park. Is really around exercising an extension of the lease until the 31st of December 2020. And leases to Hayes & Co Limited, who have actually confirmed their intent and are interested in extending the lease for this period of time.
Thank you. Questions, councillors?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Scarborough?
I noticed the comments in the report of the General Manager that we've received notification from the Heritage Commission that they're going to investigate the heritage value of the sale yards. Have they put any timeframes on that? And if you could advise us, please.
I'll hand over to one of my managers to answer that particular aspect. Karthik, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, all. Just in relation to the application that we've received from the Department of Environment and Science in terms of proposing the pig and calf sale yards to be put up on the Heritage Register. There is a timeline. We do have an opportunity to submit as a council to DES by the 7th of September, which the officers are working on at the moment, and there will be a report presented to council in the near future. Thank you.
I'll also add to that we believe the process, depending on how complicated the matter is, generally is reasonably quick. For want of better words of saying, I've heard that by the date recognised within the report, we would have some level of indication of where the overall outcome may lie. Well, certainly leaves us. We certainly are in a position, if need be, we can certainly look at further extensions if it went further than that.
Any other questions, Councillor
I
West?
just had another question to the officers. I know there were some other options just being investigated as regards the calf and pig yards. Are they in progress, or how are things going with those other sites, perhaps, to look at? Please.
Yeah. Now we are exploring other sites, and we've also in the process of meeting with other potential opportunities, and there have been a lot of interest, not a lot, a few interest from other organizations in terms of how the pig and sales yard would be operated in the near future, should this be otherwise, in terms of.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a point of clarity to that comment. In terms of am I to understand it's not about the operation? Again, I'm trying to understand that last comment. Is it not to continue operating on that site, but potentially to offer an alternative location and operation? Is that the intent?
Yes, it's both, Mr. Mayor. We're looking at alternative locations, one, but there's also been a few talks and conversations happening with potential, and there's been interest from other organizations as well as we speak.
Thank you. Any other?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor, just to add further to that. Consideration with other operators of pig and calf sale yards as well. So they have been mentioned and have tabled some interest to council. We're also undertaking an investigation of the existing sale yards to determine what cost to council it would be to make those sale yards compliant. And then also what future operational cost would be required to actually maintain those sale yards into the future, depending on the outcome of the Heritage Register and then council's decision on the future of those sale yards.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other points, questions? Do you care to read the recommendation for us again, please, Jim?
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is the council extend the current lease with Hayes & Co Proprietary Limited over part of Lot 32 on SP 113955, situated at Helen Street, but under current terms and conditions until 31 December 2020.
Seeker mover. Councillor
Happy to
Enright.
move, Mayor.
Seconder, Councillor Chalk. Wishing to speak, Councillor?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I support this recommendation. I think it is appropriate. I'm aware of some concern in the community and have played an active role in looking at ways how we can move forward for this situation. And I think an extension of this is an appropriate action at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? If not, we put the motion as per the recommendation. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to council sustainability item 11.8.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors, and good morning to those public listening to the broadcast. This report, Mr. Mayor, is administrative in nature in that it seeks to rescind a previous policy and guideline that's now deemed unsuitable and non-current and has been replaced by an existing framework. The background is council had previously adopted the policy around policies, guidelines and procedure development, and also the associated guideline with it back in August 2017. Part of the process this year was to review some of their policies, and the fact that some of these policies, 65% of them remained out of date, they're not current, required a refresh of the current policy framework to ensure that council maintained relevant and current policies in place. And as such, the policy framework and templates were developed. So basically, Mr. Mayor, this report looks to rescind the previous two pieces of documents, being the policy and the guideline, now that the policy framework is in place.
Thank you. Questions to the report for clarification? There were quite a few attachments, councillors. Any comments? Councillor Enright.
Mayor, just a comment that I see that the new procedure is very well laid out, and would like to congratulate the staff on bringing together a clear document that will enable the correct formation of policies into the future.
Thank you, councillor. Any other comments to the matter? If not, I'll ask you to, if you would please, GM, read the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for item 11.8 is that 1, council rescind the policy CM02.06 CP, policy, guideline and procedure development, and 2, council rescind the associated guideline CM02.06 GL.01, policy, guideline and procedural development.
Thank you. Councillor Seeker mover. Councillor McConnell, seconded. Councillor Chalk, wishing to speak further, councillor. Anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? No. It's carried. Yeah, but it was carried. Oh, okay. Division requested. Those in favour, Mayor, Division 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and against Division 1. Councillors, we now return to item 11.4. That was left on the table whilst the planning manager stepped away to get further advice for us. He's now returned. Would you be able to provide us further clarity, sir?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to go and do some homework on that. I've sent through an image, aerial image showing the current location, and you can see from there that the front of Mary Street for the original development, it has included about 260 metres of footpath as part of that initial stage of the development. So it extends for most of Mary Street on that side. To extend the footpath into town would somewhere around 360 metres to catch up to in Eagle Street, there's a bit of footpath as you come into Eaglesfield Street, about 20 metres. So the total length going from here, the existing footpath, through to town will be about 360 metres. As I indicated initially, that the development has already put in footpath in front of its location, and to require additional footpath will be an expense and a condition that I don't think we would be able to support. The cost of footpaths I'll probably defer to.
Yes, as a ballpark figure, generally with the cost of footpaths, we work on an average of about $1,000 a metre. You say that's very expensive concrete, but the reality of it is we may have power poles that need to be moved, we may have water supply that needs to be realigned, curb adjustments that are required to be made so that you're not ponding water in people's property. So the reality of it is, although the footpath itself might only cost you $200 a metre to lay or get installed, we allow a fair bit extra to cope with all the other associated tie-in issues that may be required. So we as a ballpark figure generally work on that $1,000 a metre. And that's a linear metre.
Thank you for those clarifications. Councillor Enright, you have further.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I just ask the Manager of Planning to confirm what footpath infrastructure will be provided as a part of the development? Does it connect with that existing path on Mary Street?
So within the development itself, there is no footpath. It's rural residential. As I indicated before, it's really only in residential developments which are smaller lots that you would provide footpath. So in this case, the development has provided footpath along the Mary Street, the 260 metres, but within the estate itself, there would not be footpath.
Just a question, Mr. Mayor. So the development hasn't been approved yet, and yet you're saying the developer has already put in a 256 metre footpath. So where does that lie?
Okay. This development has been over 3 stages. So the lots you see, just the house, yeah. So either side of the access there, 14, 15, 26, 30, those lots were initial stages of this development. And as part of that, they had to widen Mary Street and put in the footpath. So that was designed to allow for the traffic that would generate from this part of the subdivision as well. So it was, this is the final stage of a 3-part subdivision.
So they provided that footpath as part of the earlier stage of the subdivision. Any other questions?
Just a question on this trunk infrastructure. Does our planning scheme allow for external works, like this sort of stuff? I remember reading, I think about the Brooklands, one estate having to upgrade Kerry Road, which was a bit contentious, which was a little bit, was trunk infrastructure leading to an estate. What is the story with this trunk infrastructure as far as servicing a major subdivision going forward?
The situation with the Kerry Hills is slightly different. They were very much out of sequence, and there's a large area between that estate and the outskirts of Beaudesert town. So there was a request there to a condition to put in footpath as well as water and sewage. They had to take it out and pay the full cost of getting those services out to that estate because it was out of sequence. This one is slightly different in that we are really dealing with the 3rd stage of a 3-stage development. The requirements to upgrade non-trunk infrastructure is the widening of Mary Street and the footpath. To use any infrastructure charges as a credit towards putting in the footpath, you've heard the potential cost of the footpath, and that would exceed the infrastructure charges that we would raise for the whole estate and take that funding away from the infrastructure works that are required to provide trunk infrastructure for the whole Shire.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor McConnell.
I'm going to go away from footpaths and infrastructure. Go into infrastructure. I noticed there's a dam in the middle of the development, which means there's a water flow through that area. And going back to what we just discussed on Tamborine Mountain, where we don't want to bring in things long term, I suppose, the water that is part of that water course, can we confirm that the development won't force some of that water? Because I do know it's a grassed paddock, which will slow down the water. Once we start putting houses on there and probably a couple of horses, and then mowing it, will increase the flow. So can you just confirm that the design of the sub-development won't force some of that water down into Mary Street, and that it'll keep flowing along its natural course?
Yep. Sharon, if you could put up the estate map again. So with this one, we've been clear that the staging of this development has to be sequential, that they have to go from 1 to 2 to 3, simply because what they're doing is using that dam as the catchment for the initial stages, so stages 1, 2 and 3. So that dam will be effectively the retention lagoon. So when they go to stage 4, that dam will be removed, and you can see that green block against Carsons Avenue. That will become the retention pond, and that will actually then control the water. So again, it's a staged process, but they have a stormwater management plan which will address all those issues.
So the water will flow along the road from those top 7 to 17 will flow along the road to the west. What about the water that's on those southern properties? Which way will that go?
Depends on the fall of the properties, but they'll generally, any impervious areas will drain to the road. There might be some natural overflow, overland flow, which might continue on its natural path south to Mary Street. I'd have to just double check the contours on the properties, but for the most part, the stormwater drainage on that estate has been managed to ensure there's no additional impact on any surrounding properties above what would be considered the natural state.
Fantastic. That's the one I want to hear here.
Just one more question. In relation to the green area, I imagine that's the park contribution. Is it for all the stages?
So the stormwater retention pond.
That's the pond there you're talking about. Okay. So is there any other parkland that's been provided by the developer for this estate? No, and that's part of the philosophy behind infrastructure charging, is that it allows for, rather than small parks in small estates, that we tend to do more trunk parks that service a larger area.
Makes perfect sense. So any other questions? Councillor McGuinness, did you wish to speak?
Probably a comment rather than a question, and I realise the footpath coming down Mary Street, that just, I know we can't solve the problem, but it actually means that people will be just coming down to where it narrows to, and there's only 2 cars width there to be able to travel, and with people walking down the footpath, they'll naturally, from most of the estate, come down that footpath, and then I just see a safety issue there. I haven't got a solution to the problem, but I'm just recognising it's an issue there, and will continue to be an issue as more houses are built on there. Comment rather than a question to Mark.
We can take that on notice.
I guess the question that flows from the comment perhaps is there, given where the block shape is there that naturally constrains what's possible in that space, is there any practical solution to such a narrow access point. That would be an engineering question for a future date, I guess, would be the observation, perhaps.
And looking at the larger picture, we will need to have a look at that, because the lot to the east, or to the right on the map there, and also the one to the west, potentially will develop as well. So that will probably exacerbate the issue that we're having there, particularly the corner of Mary Street and Carsons Avenue. So it's something that we're going to have to look at, both from a planning and engineering point of view and through the future.
Thank you. Councillors, in light of that, in additional information, are we happy to progress this matter today? I think the only other matter was, first off, the implication if this was to be carried over. Have we clarified that issue? Okay. So, councillors, are you comfortable to continue with this matter today, would be the first question. No motion to not move forward, then we have a very extensive recommendation because it contains all of the conditions. I would not propose that we ask for the GM to read all of the conditions. However, to summarise the key identification of the block and the references particularly.
Thank you, Mayor. That Council resolved to approve the development in respect of the following properties subject to the stated conditions, and I acknowledge your comment, Mayor. There are 22 conditions. 1, that property details, real property description is Lot 200 SP 283425 and Lot 1 SP 291519. The address of the property is Mary Street, Harrisville. The site is 10.90 hectares, as listed against the 2 lots. The proposal is subdivision of for 24 rural residential lots, draining reserve and new roads. The currency period of the approval is for the development is 4 years, starting at the date that this development approval takes effect and subject to the sections outlined in the report. The conditions for the development permit are outlined. As I said, there are 22, and the final point of the recommendation is there were no applicable referral agency conditions applied.
Thank you. Councillors, seek a mover. Councillor McConnell, seconded. Councillor West, wishing to speak further, councillor? Anyone seeking leave to speak against? If not, we put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the close of those items. I have no items for miscellaneous business before us today. I would now seek a motion to move into closed session to consider 2 items before us today. Councillor McGuinness, seconded Councillor Enright. Wishing to speak.
Mayor, I just wonder whether, in view of people listening in, if we could set a time that we will be back, whether that's 11:30 or I know our deliberations in closed session can go a little bit longer, but I think it's handy for people to know exactly when we will come back.
Councillor, I've endeavoured to do that on every occasion, and our deliberations always surprise me with the extent of time they take. So I will try again at my crystal ball that we have 2 matters before us, and I would suggest that we would, now that we've moved to closed, that we would endeavour to return by 11:25.
So, can we make it a not before, which would allow people to not have to keep coming in? So if we can say,
well, I'll target the time
11:25
as, well, Councillor, I'll target the time as 11:25. And if we run past that, I understand
Yeah,
your
it's okay to
comment,
run
but I will
past it.
simply say we'll endeavour to come back at 25 past 11, and that's the best we can offer.
Yep.
When matters go into closed, I hope members of the public understand that sometimes there are issues to be discussed that we can't exactly gauge before we start discussing them. It's the same as every other item on this agenda. Thank you. Be back shortly. session. And we have before us item 13.1. GM, could you please read the recommendation?
Thank you, Mayor. Item 13.1. The recommendation is that Council endorse the engagement of Tamborine Mountain Botanic Gardens Incorporated under Section 235B of the Local Government Regulation 2012, and 2, Council enter into a contractual arrangement with Tamborine Mountain Botanical Gardens Incorporated for the management of the Tamborine Mountain Botanic Gardens to 30 June 2025.
Moved by Councillor Swanborough. Seconder. Councillor McConnell, wishing to speak further.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, the Botanical Gardens have a long history, and the development over the years has been quite outstanding thanks to the volunteers in that Botanical Gardens. It is defined by very strong leadership at the moment, and they're doing a great job. And I think the plan that they've put in place for the future of that gardens is very, very good, and I wish them every success in being able to realise that. And I'd also say that this will be a step forward for the Botanical Gardens to be able to have this funding secured, and also to be able to develop this gardens. The report does put forward the rankings, I think the Google rankings for memory, of where this garden sits in relation to regional botanical gardens, and you can see that it's right up there. I think it's one of the major attractions on Tamborine Mountain, next to Gallery Walk probably, as far as visitation goes. And so I commend this recommendation to the council.
Anyone wishing to speak against? No. Put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 13.2.
Thank you, Mayor. 13.2 deals with black box funding submissions for 2020-2021. And the recommendation is that Council endorse funding applications made under the black spot funding program for the following projects: 1, Mundilla Road and Alice Jackson Road intersection, Melora Road, geometry improvements; Beachmont Road, Beachmont, changing 6170 to 8060, resurfacing, signage and site distance improvements. 3, Beachmont Road again, Beachmont, change 9600 to 10100, resurfacing, signage and site distance improvements. 4, Albert Street and Anna Street intersection by Desert Roundabout. 5, Burnham Street and Alice Street by Desert Roundabout. And 6, Eaglesfield Street and Tyner Street by Desert Roundabout.
Thank you. We have a recommendation. I seek a mover.
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Enright, seconded. Councillor Chalk, wishing to speak further.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm delighted to speak toward this recommendation. There's certainly some great opportunity to gain funding for some of these safety improvement projects, and getting funding from our federal government to assist us in this project to provide safer environments in our region.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? No, we put the motion. Those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's unanimous. That brings me to the end of business before the meeting today, and I declare the ordinary meeting closed. Thank you, councillors.